Hello, I'm Graham Park, and welcome to another Haçienda in Conversation. And once again, I'm joined on the sofa. Oh, actually, no, I'm joined down the line from outer space, another true legendary DJ. It's the S-Man himself, Roger Sanchez.
How are you, Graham? Good to be here.
Now, I said you were in outer space. Well, you are a star, but you're in Miami today, aren't you?
I'm actually in Miami today, yes.
Back at home for once.
Back at home for like 2 minutes, and then the summertime tour kind of really kicks off and
Well,
goes
we'll
into full
come to your
gear.
travels and your summertime tour later, but I want to rewind and go way back in time to the young Roger Sanchez. Now,
Yes.
where did you grow up?
I grew up in Queens in New York City,
Okay,
um, and spent a lot of time between Manhattan, which is where I went to high school with art and design,
so
and
what?
where I lived in Corona, Queens.
So what was the young Roger Sanchez into, and what music were you listening to as a young, we'll say like early teens, teenage, when you're starting to become a
Yeah.
man? What were you listening to?
So early Roger Sanchez was really into all forms of art. The young man loved to spray can or two. There was a
Oh,
graffiti artist. I
really?
also studied architecture. Yes, I did. So that's kind of like part of my wayward youth
So when I
portion, which is
so
we
when I
used to do
first
walls and stuff like that.
So when I first started visiting New York in the 80s, the chances are I probably witnessed some S-Man graffiti.
It's quite possible you might have seen my tags up here and there, and I really got into the more kind of artistic pieces and stuff like that. And I went to the High School of Art and Design, so there was a serious concentration of some amazing artists. At the same time, there were also like break dancers, and I became a break dancer at that time. So I was very much into soul, disco, funk, early breaks. I was really growing up in that period of time that hip hop became what it was as it grew out of disco, soul, and funk. And then when disco and early hip hop then brought about additional styles like freestyle, and then inevitably house music came along. And then when house kind of entered my view screen, that's pretty much where I decided to dive down that rabbit hole.
So if you are talking about the early to mid 80s, you must have been to some great block parties in the New
Oh
York
yeah,
area. Tell me about those.
100%. I used to actually DJ some of them, and I remember doing some out in Queens in the Jamaica area, and I've also went to some of them in Brooklyn,
Wow.
which were amazing because they would do them in Coney Island, like right on the pier. Set up sound systems, and people would be dancing. You had kids breaking. Um,
Any well-known
when they were
DJs?
done,
Any well-known DJs at these block parties?
I saw Red Alert
Whoa.
back in the days when he was playing out, so that was pretty major. Um, and I didn't get to see a lot of the other guys live then, but I was always listening to the radio stations, and coming into the '90s, you had guys like Tony Humphries and Timmy Regisford doing the house sounds. But back in the day, it was like Red Alert, Africa Bambaataa. So that was kind of like the growth and the nexus of early hip hop. And the block parties were fun because when you used to have the entire block come up, people come up with food, set up a sound system, and then I'd be like my 13, 14-year-old self was a break dancer, and then I jumped on decks from a friend of mine's little apartment house party that then later on wound up doing block parties in Queens.
Oh, it
That was a
sounds
lot of fun.
fantastic. So that must have inspired you. Is that when did you think I want to make music or I want to be a DJ? You said you DJed at a block party. How did that come about?
Yes. Well, a friend of mine was the DJ that we had in Queens that was who had equipment. So he kind of got it by default because he had the entire kind of kit set up. And so when he did a block party in our neighborhood, that's about the time when I had just kind of started dabbling with turntables and really, transitioning from being the break dancer to being DJ and just kind of diving into that world. And he let me kind of jump on. That was a short set. It was like maybe 20 minutes. And then he kind of came back and took over. Um, my actual first experience DJing was about a couple of months before that, where he did a little house party in his apartment. He went to go talk to some girl, and he said, "Here, why don't you take over?" And it was my first time actually putting like needle to vinyl, and that was just me getting hooked right then and there. It wasn't very good, but
No, but
I
what
knew
were
that
you?
I
Can you
loved it.
remember what you played on that first set?
No idea right now. I think
What kind of vibe?
it was definitely a disco vibe and was early kind of early hip hop vibe. So it might have been like Africa Bambaataa, and that kind of
Party
it might have been Perfect
people.
Beat that I played. Yeah, it might have been Perfect Beat that I played.
Yeah.
It definitely was. I definitely remember seeing Tommy Boy
Oh, looking for the
records
perfect
and
beat. That
um,
that blew my mind when I first
yeah.
said looking for the perfect beat. Unbelievable, unbelievable.
It's just those early drum programmings like that then led the way into what then became house music and other forms of electronic music as some of the early hip hop guys were experimenting with Linn drums and SP200s.
So when did you first become aware of house music?
Mm. At that point in time, I think it was had to be around 87, 88 when I was not I was playing predominantly everything from what was early freestyle, hip hop, funk, disco, and soul. And then I used to go to Rock and Soul Records in Manhattan, and I just started seeing these records coming out of Chicago, the Trax International, Trax International, DJ International Records, and I just remembered I got Jesse Saunders. I can't remember what the name of the label was, but it was on Back Again. Um, and I started getting, it was different because sonically, it was obviously the 4/4, which kind of reminded me of the disco vibe. And at that point in time in New York, Latin hip hop, which was
Mm.
freestyle, and hip hop was predominant in the clubs. And then came this sound that was very reminiscent of disco, and it really kind of locked in with me. So I just remember playing, early records from Hercules, obviously Marsha Jefferson, Jesse Saunders. That then began to take up a lot more real estate in my record box. So all of a sudden, it went from like the hip hop, freestyle, disco, and soul, and then all of a sudden, house music started just gradually
It took
taking up
over, didn't it?
more and
It
more
started to take
space.
over.
It's
I
like
w-
it just took over my box, and then I was like, and then at that point in time, a friend of mine was a member of the Paradise Garage. He
right.
invited me out because I had gone to the Loft, um, which was also amazing. But when I went to Paradise Garage and kind of hear that sound on that sound system with those dancers, I think that just kind of cemented something for me. I'm like,
How old were you
this
then?
is what resonates. Uh,
If you're saying
was that
87,
19? This is like around 87.
yeah.
Um, uh, let's see. I
Not
would have been about 20 years old.
okay, right. Wow.
No, I'm lying. I would have been, yeah, about 20 years old.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, 20 years old,
Yeah,
right
yeah.
around that point.
That. I mean, I'm a few years older than you, but that's about the age I was when I started DJing as well. Um, but yeah, house took over. Just before we carry on for house, you said that kind of Latin hip hop. You must have been a big
Yeah.
fan of everything on Smoking Records. Remember the blue label with the red logo, Smoking,
Oh, yeah.
Bingo
Yeah,
Bongo,
yeah.
and all that stuff.
Bingo
That was
Bongo Smoking Records, Easy Street. Then you
yes.
also had
Paul, what's his name? Paul Simpson and a diva.
Paul Simpson. You had
Yeah.
Micmac Records, which is very much the Latin kind of hip hop
Cultural
sound.
vibe, Mafumbe.
Cultural Vibe,
What a
Mafube.
tune.
That was the early house sound coming out of Easy Street. And I actually did tracks with them later on as we get on into my production years. We can touch on that. But yeah, I remember all those labels.
So when did you? So you dabbled at DJing. You done a bit of DJing. You discovered house music. You were getting into house music. When did you think I want to make a record, and how did you go about doing that?
So around the early times of me playing, like within the first 3, 4 years, one of the things that when I would go see other DJs play, they would have these exclusive tracks that nobody else had. I would go to Roseland. There was a DJ named Baby J who used to play there. And he'd be playing some things that I couldn't find them at the record shop. And then I realized these were kind of like secret weapons that DJs would kind of make their own name for themselves because they were the only ones to have it. And a friend of mine introduced me to uh, his friend who had this kind of basement recording studio in Queens. And I wanted to kind of come up with my own little beats that I could play on reel to reel at some of the events. So I kind of went there and I started dabbling and paying them like, I can't remember, $20 an hour, $10 an hour, something ridiculously low for studio time. And then I started learning how to use the SP 1200 sampler, um, really trying to, just like I said, make my own little, I'm going to play it at my set and nobody else has it type of tracks. Um, and from there, I remember I started going to the different record labels around New York City to pick up vinyl as a DJ.
And there was
I
a
was
lot.
reporting to Billboard.
Yeah,
there was a lot at that point in time. You had Strictly Rhythm that had just come up, New Groove,
Nervous,
Quark Records, Nervous. Well, it was before Nervous, even before Nervous opened up.
Sam's.
You know, the early ones. Well, it was Sam's label, but before they kind of really got set up with the dance side of things, the main labels you went to see in New York City were like New Groove, Strictly Rhythm, 8 Ball Records, Cutting
King
Records
Street.
all the way up
King
Street. So in the kind of first early days, I would bring my little cassettes of the tracks that I was working on, and as I was picking up records, and Curtis Urbina from Quark Records said, "Hey, do you have anything that you've been working on?" I played him something. He was listening to it, and there was one little section that he said, "You know what? The rest of the track is okay, but that little section, if you could turn that into a full extended track, that I'd be interested in." That then became my very first release under the name Ego Trip, which was the parties that I used to do in Manhattan.
Trip, yeah.
And I had a track that I did called Dream World with my spoken word voice on it. And one side was very swingy and deep, and the other one was, I guess it was like almost like prototypical early techno, for lack of a better term, because then later on I found that it was very big up north of England, the techno scene. That was my very first track, and that's really when I said, no, this is something that I think I can actually really dive into, and I really want to do this full time.
And how did you learn how to produce music? You say you rented this little basement studio in Queens. Did you have someone to help you, or was it, here's the studio, here's the equipment? How did you talk us through that?
No, it was it was my friend who's was basically guiding me through. As he was working the equipment, I was paying attention to what he was doing, and then he would show me. Initially, I believe he was working with a keyboard sequencer, and then he was working with an Atari 1040 ST computer, which became,
I used to use one,
yeah,
floppy disks.
And that became the very first computer that I started learning how to produce on.
What sort were you using? Were you using the early Cubase or the early ST?
Simply Tracks Gold. Yeah, that was the early one. Yeah, Simply Tracks Gold was the very first program that I started learning on, and when I bought my early Apple.
And that was when like the Atari was synced up to the 2-inch tape or whatever size tape with a MIDI signal, and you have to press the tape, and the computer would jump in.
Correct. You had to stripe one channel on the multi-track tape with a Synthi tone. Synthi channel, and then that would then slave the synthesizers and the sequencer to it. And then from there, I started learning how to use the sampling drum machine SP 1200. That kind of then became my go-to box where I really dove into it. And with that 10-second worth sample time, I really started getting deeper into learning how to kind of arrange and produce entire tracks out of that.
But you were kind of learning on the job and trying things out, making mistakes and finding your own groove, finding your own sound.
And not only that, it was me looking at somebody else, watching somebody else work, and then taking that away and saying, okay, now let me get my own little box, and little by little, trial and error, kind of really amassing my database on how to work these different machines.
Yeah, that's exactly what when I used to do loads of remixes, I'd watch what people were doing, and then remember that, and then I'd I could try it for myself. Now, your first kind of the first record I think you're most well known for, your breakthrough, was Love Dancing on Strictly Rhythm. How did you
Correct.
create Love Dancing? Because it still sounds amazing today. It's got that.
Thank you.
I think that's the first example of that kind of Roger Sanchez swing.
Swinging vibe.
Great sample, but it was on Strictly Rhythm, one of the labels of the moment.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
So what happened was Gladys Pizarro, who was the A&R director for Strictly Rhythm, had heard my release Dream World. And as I would go to the different record labels to pick up my vinyl every week, and by the way, I was a Billboard reporting DJ, so that meant that I would send my chart in every week to compile and amass the dance chart. So I was able to get a lot of access to the labels because of it. Gladys said, "Wait a minute, you're that guy who did the Quark record, the Dream World record," and Quark was right in the same building on the upper floor. She goes, I'd love to have you do something for us. How about if I book some studio time and you work on some tracks and give us, an EP? And I said, cool, great. She booked some studio time in Manhattan, and I had worked on a couple of tracks. She wanted something a little bit more of ambient house in the beginning. So a couple of tracks that I had done were a little bit more ambient and deeper. And then like the last day, I said, you know what? I have an idea for the sample of a track, this disco track that I've always loved, which is a Loose Joints, Is It All Over My Face? And then I went in with the engineer, who actually was a keyboard player as well. I programmed the drums on a Yamaha drum machine that had the swinging kind of the real cool swinging quantize on it, and that din thing, cowbell, that all came out of that. Did the bass line, put the sample in, and then played those organ chords over it with my keyboard player. He did like this little solo flute section. Then turned that into Gladys Pizarro. That record became the lead single off that EP. Then they went on, then they said, you know what, this is going to be its own release. Tony Humphries was given the test press and played it at the Zanzibar anniversary party in New Jersey, and played that track, I think, 5 times that night.
Wow.
That really kicked off the whole
High
run.
praise. High praise.
I always credit Tony, and I give him all the love in the world. I'm like, bro, you had a major hand in really kickstarting my career.
Presumably at that time, Tony Humphries, correct me if I'm wrong, but he had a mix show on BLS, so you must have heard your own record on the radio as well, and probably on Kiss as well, right?
Yeah, but he was on Kiss, and Timmy Regisford was on BLS.
BLS, yeah.
At that point in time. But his show on Kiss was very, very highly listened to, and his residency at Zanzibar was kind of one of the most, the biggest scenes for house music in New Jersey and in New York.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to tell me about those shows, because I had a friend who lived in New York, and he used to send me cassettes every week, and it was my Kiss FM mix show and my BLS mix show. It was Humphries, Regisford, occasionally Knuckles, and also Marley Marl for a bit of hip hop. Marley Marl.
Yeah, I know. And Marley was another monster.
And that's when I thought, hang on, this is how you DJ, because British DJs were rubbish back then. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. So you then went on to release loads of stuff on Strictly Rhythm, but also on Nervous as well. How could you release on both labels? Because they were kind of rivals, weren't they?
So interestingly enough, in doing Strictly Rhythm, I became one of the kind of go-to producers, and they really, gave me a lot of love. There's also, what I used to do was create an entity, so some concept, and I'd be like, okay, that's going to remain with you.
Yeah.
I actually did the very first Nervous record, Nice Guy Soul Man, that they ever released.
Yes. Nice Guy
Nervous, because they were doing hip hop. They were. But Nice Guy Soul Man was the first house record that they released on Nervous. And it's funny because I then gone on to kind of be the first release on a couple of other labels like Ultra Records. My track was their very first release. it's kind of like this interesting one, like seemed to be the go-to guy to kickstart your house label. Um, but then I did the Nice Guy Soul Man for Nervous Records, which kind of opened up another door. It, I'm not gonna lie, it did cause a little bit of tension, but I was doing so many releases with Strictly that I said, there has to be a bit of a balance. Um, there was a period of time after that where I didn't work with Strictly Rhythm for a while, and then down the road we patched everything up. But Strictly Rhythm was such a seminal label and an incredible driving force for a lot of guys like myself, Masters at Work, Tom Terry. We did a lot of releases with them.
So you said earlier that Gladys booked some studio time in Manhattan. So were you working in other studios, or did you eventually get around to getting your own studio?
I was piecing my own studio together little by little. Like I bought a drum machine, I bought the SP1200 sampler, I bought my computer, but I didn't have an actual room when I first
Got
started
you.
to kind of create. So I would use studio time that I would labels would give me, or I would rent some studio
But at
time to
least you
go
could
in
you could
to
try ideas out at home.
could start coming.
Yeah.
Start coming up with ideas at home, and then eventually I built my own home studio in Queens where I had my sampler, my drum machines, everything, and then I was working out of my home pretty
Yeah,
much
so
exclusively from that
and
point
that would
on.
explain why you were then so prolific and releasing so much stuff because you
Well,
were just able to get up and
it
do it.
in addition to that, though, there was a period of time, I believe from like 1992 to like 1996 almost, where I started getting hired to do a lot of remixes, and
Well,
I
I was
was
going to
going
come to that.
into
You were
major studios.
in the
Yeah.
90s, every other week I'd get a test pressing from a British record company. And it'd have S Man or Roger S remix. You were
Yeah.
so prolific in the 90s, but a lot of the stuff you did was actually quite commercial. I mean, not all of it. I mean, one of my favorite remixes of yours, and I still play it now because it's just absolutely brilliant, is Kathy Sledge, "Take Me Back to Love." Brackets again. You've got your main
Yeah.
club mix, but you got the S Man kind of stripped down mix. Two copies of that at the Hacienda. The place would go
Would go
wild.
nuts.
That must have taken up so much time with
It's
all these remixes.
that period of time I could say I was in the studio like literally every week. 3 weeks out of the month, I'd be in the studio Monday through Friday, just turning out remix after remix. And with tracks like Kathy Sledge, I would sometimes get the artist to come in, and I would
Great.
structure the production to re-sing the vocals. So that's how I kind of developed a relationship with Kathy
But
and some other artists that I work with.
how did that feel as a young man who's got his home studio and he's learning his craft and you've been doing it for just a few years, getting the legendary Kathy Sledge and telling her what you want? How was that?
It it was amazing. And I think the thing that really stuck to me was how open she was to the entire creative process. Because they loved what I had done production wise, it allowed me the ability to have them to trust me when it came time to, if they've given me a song, I'm like, look, I can do it like this, but if you re-sang it, I don't. And this is the other thing, that you had a time stretch. The vocal back then was a little bit more
Oh,
complex. You had to use certain machines,
I know.
and the effect wasn't always the best.
I know.
So that would be kind of like a selling point. Look, I've remixed your track and I've time stretched your vocals, but it would sound so much better if you came and you re-sang
Listen,
the
I
vocals
know.
and you could do your own performance. And a lot
I
of
know.
artists were totally up for that.
I even now I can't listen to my brand new Heavies remix anymore, which everyone asks me to play because of the time stretched vocals. I just wish I'd thought of asking to get India and Davenport and the guy, the drummer in to re-vocal it. But you know, hindsight's a great thing, isn't it? In between all this amazing output, were you still being able to do DJ gigs?
So on the weekends, I was DJing either my own events in New York City. Like I developed my ego trip parties, which became really big. It started off at the basement of Mars, and then I wound up doing my own night in conjunction with another DJ called Roman Ricardo. We moved it to this 2,000 cap venue called the Octagon in New York that really, really blew up. And then I started touring. And what wound up happening was my first tours to the UK took place in 1990. right around the year where Love Dancing had dropped.
Hmm.
That's when I started touring, and it was specifically because 10 Records had licensed Love Dancing,
Yes.
and that began to then take me to play in the UK. And then the prolific output started kind of dropping because then I was on tour more.
Hmm.
In the beginning, it was if I from a financial point of view, it's like, look, I make more money doing these remixes than I do going on the road, so it's gotta make sense. And then it just inverted, and it became later on, while I'm making so much money touring and enjoying connecting with the crowds, um, that I wound up having less time to do remixes and so on and so forth. So that became kind of like the rebalancing of my time management.
And what I mean, what did?
But so it,
But why do you think? Right, because like New York, Chicago, Detroit, from the mid to late '80s through to the '90s, those three cities all had their own sound. Were making the most amazing house music, but it was blowing up in the UK and then Europe, but not really. Apart from obviously people like yourself doing little club nights, why was your own country, the US, not appreciating its own heritage? Why were you all coming to the UK? Why did it blow up in the UK?
because the UK had club culture that America really didn't have. After the disco kind of craze, then kind of had its backlash of like anti-disco, the club scene kind of really went a bit more underground and became more the kind of gay crowd bastions for that particular type of dance sound. Clubs then became more about hip hop. Hip hop was the big dominant form of danceable music in the United States at that point in time. So more club nights with more people were geared towards that. Whereas in the UK, dance music and house music in particular really took root with part of the club culture in the UK. To date, the UK is still one of my biggest audiences around the world. As big as dance music has gotten, the UK remains one of the core staple scenes. It is ingrained in the culture, and even this new generation, they're the kids of rave kids. You know what
No,
I
I
mean?
know.
So
Well, you've
that
you've
kind of
DJed you've DJed
that
at
rave
Hacienda. You've DJed at many Hacienda
and,
events,
and,
and
and
it's a young crowd with a few older heads. I mean, what do you think the appeal of?
exactly.
What do you think the appeal is? I mean, do you remember your first time? Well, first of all, had you heard of the Hacienda? Were you aware of what was
Oh
going on?
yeah,
And can you remember your
yeah.
first time there?
Yeah, I at that point in time, kind of like in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, we were hearing these records coming over from Mike Pickering, yourself, um, and we were kind of hearing these kind of legendary recountings of the nights. Um, and the closest thing we had to that, the good thing about New York is New York had its own amazing nightlife with places
Yeah,
like
at the
Paradise
time I used to
Garage
come over.
and then Red Zone. So you know what it was like.
Mars. Did you ever
The
go to
U
Mars?
I used to have my my party ego trip in the
That's
basement
well,
of
yeah.
Mars. That's where I
I
started my ego trip
The late great
parties.
Mark Kamens used to get me out there every month
Yeah,
from '89 to about '92 at Mars.
yeah.
Amazing, amazing.
Then the tunnel was a
Yes,
house
the
club with Johnny
yeah.
Dynell playing. I played the tunnel as well. So we did have comparable things in New York City, but not so much the rest of the country. But we were hearing all these amazing stories about what was coming over from the UK, and then the records would come over that I'd be buying all these imports from the UK,
Voodoo
tracks
Ray,
that yourself had done, Mike Pickering,
Pickering.
and the Hacienda sound, particularly with piano driven, kind
Yeah.
of like really soulful, gospel influenced sounds, really resonated with me as that's where I was at production wise. My first time and playing at the Hacienda, I believe was the night that Frankie Knuckles and David Morales were there.
Yeah.
So it might have been a Def Mix night because both
It was
Frankie and
probably
David
I
played
think it was
that
the
night.
11th birthday.
Yes, I think so.
That would have
I
been
just remember the
1993.
energy.
93, I think that would have been.
Yes, yes. The energy in that room was unbelievable. And it reminded me of the tunnel with the kind of narrow, um, the long kind of dance floor with the high ceiling with the different levels. That kind of reminded me of the way the tunnel was set up in New York City. But the energy, man, it's like hearing tracks like dun, 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 dun. My brain just went.
Yeah, don't worry.
Was it Living Joy? Anyway, um, those tracks dropping on that dance floor and the way people went for it was just amazing to me. And it really made me resonate with that UK crowd, especially with the way the kind of Hacienda had its magic.
Well, and they still resonate with you now because, like, over the past 10, 15 years, lockdown aside, you've done many Hacienda Nights, and
Yes.
a lot of the people who come to Hacienda Nights weren't even born when the club closed. What do you think its appeal is, and why do young audiences want to come and hear old DJs like us? Why do you think that is?
I think their parents were there and they've
Yes.
just recounted these stories of what an amazing time they had on the dance floors. This generation has grown up with club culture and rave
Yeah,
culture and festival
absolutely.
culture, whereas our generation, we were just kind of breaking into it.
Yeah,
We were
exactly.
the generation that kind of created that. So the young generation kind of hearing the stories of how amazing it was, want to relive that. And here's the brand that brought that experience to their parents.
Yeah.
It's almost like a passing of the torch and coming of age. They want to now experience this. I think
No,
that really kind of connects with the audience.
no, it does, and you're absolutely right. And it's a thrill and a privilege to still be able to do it to a new generation. Let's just rewind then back
Absolutely.
to the 90s. So the 90s comes to an end. We get to a new century, the 21st century, and you released one of the first tracks on Defected, which was, you're probably your most well-known track, international hit, Another Chance. That's over 20 years old.
Insane.
How did that come about? How did you create it?
So I was actually signed to Sony prior to Defected even opening up. Simon Dunmore was still with Cool Tempo,
Yeah.
Chrysalis at that point in time.
Hmm.
And as I was working on the album for Sony, then Defected opened up. I had started doing some original productions with them. The project that I was working on with Sony, the dance department folded as I was kind of halfway done with my album.
I
And
remember the
because I've
time
been
well.
working
Yeah.
with Simon, yeah, and I was because I was working with Simon Dunmore, he said, "Listen, why don't I step in and I'll take the project on at Defected, and we'll help you complete the project, and we'll take it over from Sony for here." So he went and negotiated the deal with Sony because their dance division had folded. Uh, and the very last track that had done on the album was Another Chance because I thought I need something a little more underground. Who knew?
Exactly.
That was literally the last track on the album that I had done, and then I submitted the album to Simon, and then it had to be like about a couple of months later. He was like, okay, like a month or two later, he was like, okay, we're going with Another Chance as the single. I'm like, cool. And then he phoned me up to say, after the record was released, he goes, are you sitting down? I'm like, no, but I can. He goes, yeah, you might want to. He goes, we've just gone number one. It was Defected's very first number one record in the UK.
Listen, I remember
That just
getting
set
my
off a whole chain of events that was insane.
I remember getting my test pressing from Simon and ringing him up, going, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" It really was, and it still sounds fresh. I mean, I wouldn't say I drop it very often, but when I do, the crowd love it, and it just works. It's fantastic. On the subject of record labels, though, you've got your own label, Stealth Records, which has been going for quite a while.
Yes.
What's the kind of ethos behind that? It's quite kind of Latin/tribal vibes. Is that a fair way of
So
saying?
I actually have two labels. I have Stealth Records and Under the Radar. Stealth Records is much more my traditional kind of soulful classic sounds of house music and Latin and Afro and tribal. So it's very organic. Whereas Under the Radar is a lot more tech, a lot more underground, a lot more experimental,
Yeah.
and it goes a bit tougher.
I'm
So I
more of a
like having those two.
I'm more of a Stealth
More of a
Records
stealth
guy.
guy.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
this is the thing. I kind of do both worlds.
Yeah,
So
of
I
course you
like
do.
having the option to drop both.
And of course, you're still doing your release yourself radio show. Where do you find
radio
the time
show.
to do everything? You're always on the road. I suppose technology helps. You can sit in a hotel room and do a radio show
Yes.
now, can't you?
Yes. I mean, I constantly take a production studio with me in my backpack everywhere I go, including a microphone. So thankfully, I'm able to do that. Um, it's just part of the discipline, mate. I just say, like going to the gym, I set the time. This is the
Exactly.
time for this, to the exclusion of everything else. And it just has to be done.
Listen, I've been doing these interviews all week, but I do have to make sure that my weekly radio show is ready for all the radio stations on a Friday morning. So at 5 a.m., this morning, I'm doing my radio show before coming here. It's about discipline. And technology helps do that. On the subject of technology, you are very, very, I love watching you. I mean, you were great on vinyl, absolutely brilliant, but you really have embraced modern technology, the CDJ 3000s and the mixer and everything. And you even give masterclasses. I mean, how important is the tech side to your performances as a DJ?
I view it the way I view painting, because I paint as well. I have different mediums. I can paint on acrylic with a brush and I get a different result. Just like with spray paint, I have a different result. Technology allows me to express different ideas and create different circumstances and different moments. So the ability for me to have 4 decks, 4 CDJ 3000s, which I then set up loops on one, acapellas on another, and bring in things, allows me to create remixes on the spot. It's just live, kind of like performance art. That's how I approach it.
You are great at it. I could watch you, but I say I could watch you for ages, but usually I have to rush off to another gig, you know.
I know how it is.
But I mean, also, I did watch you when you did a lot of live streaming during lockdown, and that was fantastic.
Yes.
You did some Haçienda stuff as well. That was really,
yes,
really good. Now, you recently got married.
Yes, I did.
So
this was
how long ago was that? How long? It was only quite recently. Just
got married in December.
Wow! Well, belated congratulations.
Thank you very much. I met my
wife. Does
wife
your wife
7
travel
years
with
ago.
you?
Sometimes she DJs and produces things, and she's a creator herself. She actually has her own label called Creatrix. Started to release her own material.
Well, we
keep it in the family.
On the subject of marriage, I've been married for just over 24 years.
Wow! Congratulations.
My wife Jenny has got a question for you. I said I'm talking to.
Okay, good, Jenny.
You remember Jenny, don't you, from Cream?
I do, and I send a lot of love, Jenny. Always great to see you when I see you.
I said, have you got a question for Roger? She went, yeah, ask him. Does he still only drink Shiraz?
No.
No,
I've expanded no. And actually, it was interesting. I used to only drink Rioja, not Shiraz.
That was it, yeah.
Red
it was
wine.
definitely red wine, yeah.
I
remember in Australia with you were telling me all about that, and I'm like, oh, come on, Roger, just give me a drink.
The red wines. But I've expanded it because I've really gotten into different types of foods, and friends of mine are chefs. So I've gotten into sake. I love sake.
Oh, I remember I remember last time I saw you having some sake, yeah.
Some Japanese whiskey.
No,
tequila.
No. Keep it Scottish.
Yes.
Keep it single malt. Sorry.
Listen. And I've gotten into white wines. And then all these things pair with food. So this is all food driven. I don't just kind of sit there and have a drink without food. Gotta have food.
You've got to have food, yeah. But it's tough on the road, isn't it? Because you might not get enough sleep. You might be having to grab a bite, and it's not good health. How do you manage to relax and take time for yourself in your mad schedule?
I tend to be very disciplined, and the older and the more further along my career I've gotten,
this is a theme.
The more I value time.
This is a theme. The other DJs,
yes,
the other DJs I've been talking to are all saying similar. The older you get, the wiser you get, and the more disciplined you have to be. Otherwise, you can't continue for the next few days, can you?
No, and not only that, I find that I'm taking more time for myself. I actually enjoy everything more because as you know, when we were a bit younger, it was all about work, go, to almost the exclusion of everything, which it kind of has to be when you're building yourself up. I think you learn to actually take a minute and enjoy life the further along you get.
It's not all about work, is it? Right, I'm conscious of the time because you've got to fly off in your spaceship to another planet.
Yes, got to go hit warp drive.
Let's do some quick quick fire questions.
Do it.
How do you source new music? Because my inbox has overwhelmed with music. How do you find new music?
Besides going through the tons of downloads, and I actually have somebody who helps me download it,
Okay.
I actually take a couple of hours out every week to go through all the DSPs and just kind of hunt. And it reminds me of going to record shops back in the days where you have to take a couple of hours out and sit in front of bins and just kind of sort through. If you're lucky, you have somebody who knows your taste and goes, I put the stack aside for you. But I usually have to just go diving. And I bump into things that I might not have necessarily listened to.
There's that discipline thing again. Club or festival? What would you rather DJ at, club or festival?
I'm always been a club man. I love clubs. The intimacy is always, even as in the big club.
Okay, I was going to say big club or small club. So I'm talking high ceiling or low ceiling.
You know, they both have different kind of feelings for me. I love big clubs for a bigger reach, but the intimate clubs are always going to be closer to my heart because you really connect with people closely there.
You do.
I find some of my best sets are the intimate clubs.
Agreed. On the subject of sets, what's your view on the current trend of the past few years of promoters getting as many DJs on the set as possible so we all have shorter set times? What's your view on that?
I think sometimes it doesn't do a great service to the audience. I think if you have so many DJs, and especially if they're all very similar and they'll be playing similar sets, I just think it's done from an economic standpoint, not necessarily from a qualitative standpoint. It'd be nicer to have longer sets.
Agreed.
Or at least spread things out a bit. You know what I mean? Or if you need to have that many people, have different rooms to give people it's always great to stumble from one room to another and discover something new.
Different rooms is good.
But cramming them all on the same stage, 100 people, 10 minutes apiece, not good.
What is, and on the subject of DJs, what advice would you give to any aspiring DJs or producer who are watching this going, I want to do what Roger does? What advice would you give to the young men and women who want to do what you're doing?
The first thing is trust your instinct and go for what you love, not what you think is popular. If you copy everyone, you will be like everyone and go nowhere. If you copy no one and just go your own route, it may be slower, but you'll stand out. And that's how you make your way.
And this is exactly what my son is doing. I'm very proud of him for doing that, you know.
Yes.
What's the biggest lesson you've learned throughout your life and career?
The only currency that we have as human beings is our time. And the more importance you give to the quality of your time, the more amazing your life is going to be.
That's quite deep, but I like it. And
this is what I learned.
What are you most proud of?
Aside from being the father to my children, I'm most proud of the fact that I have been able to do what I love for a living and show people it can be done if you put 100% of your heart into something. Exactly. And if there's a need for an example, I'm happy to be it.
Last question. If we could go on a little, well, not spaceship, a time machine and go back to Queens in the 70s, early 80s, young Roger Sanchez, and you go back to meet your young self, what would you say to the young Roger Sanchez?
The only thing I would say in terms of wanting something different is just to be a little careful of the people you allow close to you. Make sure you pay attention. But everything that I've done has led me to where I am. So I would say enjoy your life, make sure you pay attention to your time and really value it. You will never be this age with this blessed at this point in time you are in your life, no matter where you find yourself. In the future, many blessings will come. Just enjoy and remember everything. It's going to be what you have as your treasure.
That is brilliant.
When you get to where I'm at.
That is brilliant. Roger, absolutely fantastic talking to you. We will see you,
great talking to you,
on a dance floor soon. I'll see you behind the decks soon for a big Roger Sanchez hug. Stealth Records, Release Yourself Radio, all your forthcoming productions and everything. Good luck for the future. Thank you for joining us all
you
the
very
way from
much.
Miami. That was Roger Sanchez. This has been Hacienda in Conversation, and we'll see you all again soon.